we want to thank you for joining us and let you know that our aim as the Integrative Duo is to bring you different conversations and opinions from knowledgeable and amazing people across the globe. Some of our topics discussed and opinions expressed invite you to look at health and wellness through a different lens. It is not medical advice, and we encourage you to speak to your healthcare provider for any continuing concerns.
Methylation and all the biochemical pathways and what drives issues with that, which is environment, which is going to be gut issues, diet, stress, mold illness, oxalates, etc. And this is what is causing most chronic illness that we see in clinic.
Welcome to the Integrative Duo podcast. You're here with Kat and Beck. We're sisters with very unique paths, wanting to explore all things holistic living, self-development and consciousness with you.
We're joining forces to help support and inspire others to lessen the chemical load, eat more whole foods, become more conscious of their thoughts and beliefs, plus so much more.
Now we want to quickly chat with you about using medicinal mushrooms holistically. There is so much evidence now to show how medicinal mushrooms can be utilised, and they all have such a wide variety of benefits. But some basics are lion's mane and how that improves cognitive function, or reishi on relaxing the nervous system. When choosing to take a supplement though, it's so important to choose high quality, and that's why we love the brand Life Cycle. Life Cycle is based in Byron Bay, Australia, and is grown to be an evolutionary mushroom biotechnology company across the globe. They offer high-quality professional products including full-spectrum double liquid extracts. And if you'd love to explore the world of medicinal mushrooms, head over to their website at www.lifecycle.com. Cycle is spelled C-Y-K-E-L. And when you go to the checkout, enter the Integrative Duo 10 to get 10% off of your order. So all one word, Integrative Duo 10 to get 10% off. Now let's get to the podcast. So today on the podcast, we've got Joanne Kennedy, who is a naturopath, MTHFR and histamine intolerance specialist. She also assists people with gut issues and all the various female hormonal imbalance conditions such as PCOS, menopause, PMS, endometriosis, plus many more. Prior to establishing her own practice, Jo worked at MTHFR Support Australia as a naturopath, specialising in treating patients with the gene mutation and methylation issues. She's been able to help hundreds of patients with chronic health issues due to her knowledge of methylation and the biochemical pathways. So we're so excited to have this conversation today. And I want to know what started your journey into becoming a naturopath and what you're doing today.
So it's an interesting journey for me because I was a corporate girl for many years, and I would jump from one industry to the next because I never really wanted to work in corporate. I just thought if I worked in wine it'd be more interesting than law, for instance. And then when I was in my late 20s, I promised myself when I turned 30 that I'd start yoga. I just always knew I should do it. Anyway, I found this amazing Indian girl, Pia. She was out here from Mumbai, living in Kirribilli in Sydney. And she was running a very, very small private sort of yoga classes from her apartment. And I went and met her. And she would say to me, Jo, you're holding on to the mat like you're going to fall off the earth. And she said, you need to ground yourself and you need to look into Ayurvedic medicine. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So I started Googling Ayurvedic medicines, Indian natural medicine. And I came across a course in Ayurveda at Nature Care College in Sydney. And I just went to see the course advisor, and she sort of said, look, it's just a little course. If you want to be an Ayurvedic practitioner, 8 years of training, you've got to go to India if you're really serious. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm not going to do that. And she's like, what about, Western clinical nutrition? And I'm like, okay, well, that sounds fascinating. And I really did. I just enrolled and I just started. Like this all happened within a week. And then halfway through studying nutrition, I went to the clinic at, I had to like be a I had to go to the clinic to help them get patients, basically. And they were talking about herbal medicine. And they gave me withania or ashwagandha. And I remember feeling so chilled out. I was like, this is amazing. Like, this stuff really works. So I was like fascinated with herbs after that. So I went straight into the naturopathy degree and just loved every minute of it, to be honest. Like, really loved studying. And I think that's why when I left Endeavour, I went to work at MTHFR Support and learnt about methylation. And not just methylation, but I think everything that was going to drive issues with methylation, such as chronic gut issues, right? So SIBO, candida and yeast and oxalate issues and sulfation problems. And this is when we're starting to get into functional medicine and deciphering functional medicine tests like organic acids, etc., where you really are getting to the root cause of illness. So college was great, but I didn't learn what I know now there. It was a good start, but it was delving into methylation and all the biochemical pathways and what drives issues with that, which is environment, which is going to be gut issues, diet, stress, mold illness, oxalates, etc. And this is what is causing most chronic illness that we see in clinic.
Oh, that's fascinating. And I think functional medicine is becoming more of a hot topic of late, because we realize that health isn't just one issue. Everything can affect your overall health and well-being. So I'd love to hear a bit more about the MTHFR gene, and if you could really break that down for us and why that is such a hot topic in the health and wellness field at the moment.
Yeah, great question. So it is a hot topic. It is one gene in the body and one enzyme in the body, and it's not the be all and end all of everything. I think a lot of people overemphasize issues with MTHFR, and this is why I do it, because I set them straight. So MTHFR is a gene and an enzyme. So we have the MTHFR gene provides the code for the MTHFR enzyme to function. And what the MTHFR enzyme does, it takes folate from your food and attaches a methyl group to it to create methylfolate. And methylfolate is an active form of folate that's used in the methylation pathway. So there's other things that you need in the methylation pathway, like you need vitamin B12. So what do you need for B12? Well, you need to eat animal protein, you need good hydrochloric acid, you need good gut microbiome to absorb it. You need methionine. So where do you get methionine? Really from animal protein, okay? You need other B vitamins, like you need B6, you need B2. It's a whole lot of other things you need with the methylation pathway for it to function. So it's not just an issue with one gene, not one enzyme MTHFR. So even if you have a mutation on MTHFR, it doesn't mean it's expressing. Or you might have no mutation on MTHFR and you don't eat any folate. You don't eat your green leafy vegetables, you don't eat folate, or you have SIBO. So SIBO can be a major cause of folate deficiency. So if you're not consuming enough folate or absorbing enough folate, it's irrelevant if you've got a gene mutation or not. It's the environment, right? So when we're looking at MTHFR, it's really the environment that's going to be is going to be causing problems with that enzyme, mostly, okay? However, if you're homozygous C677T MTHFR, it will often drive up homocysteine, and that can cause lots of issues with fertility, recurrent miscarriage, high insulin. It can damage the blood-brain barrier. It's a blood clotting risk marker. So homozygous MTHFR often does drive up homocysteine, so that's what you need to be looking at. You need to be looking at your homocysteine levels, not just a gene mutation, okay? So one part of the puzzle, it's not the be all and end all of everything.
That's really interesting. I found it really fascinating because I started seeing a naturopath a couple of years ago, and she said that I had all the symptoms of having the MTHFR gene because I wasn't, all the food intolerances, sluggish liver, all that sort of stuff.
Wrong, it's wrong. It's completely incorrect. Yeah, it's not a diagnosis of anything.
Okay.
It doesn't mean anything is a standalone thing. It really doesn't. Right? So food intolerances are going to be coming from gut microbiome issues and mold illness and oxalate illness in the majority of cases. Right? It's nothing to do with a gene mutation. So, and this is just the truth, right? So many practitioners got on the bandwagon with MTHFR. They might have done a short course, they might have read about it, and it was a hot topic, it's fascinating, and therefore they extrapolate and think that everything's due to that gene, and they prescribe methylated nutrients, which cause a lot of people to get very, very, very sick, right? So for instance, if you've got issues with your health, such as multiple food intolerances, gut issues, mold illness, you're going to have, very likely, you're going to have high histamine, right? High histamine. So what the methyls do is they break down histamine, right? But if you take methyls to break down histamine and you're not treating the cause, which is going to be mold, oxalate, SIBO, gut issues, it will break histamine down quick, smart, and it will come out as an adverse reaction. So it'll come out as a headache, a migraine, insomnia, anxiety, nausea, skin issues. So when you look at adverse reactions to B vitamins, they're often histamine symptoms that are being exacerbated or even seen for the first time. So I always question my people on histamine symptoms, and some people have no histamine symptoms, and I'll be quite surprised. Right. And then lo and behold, they'll take B vitamins and they'll email me saying, Jo, I got a headache. It's like, actually, they did have histamine high. It was just not showing up as a symptom yet. So the overprescribing of methyls just for people who have an MTHFR gene is rampant and incorrect, and is often making people really sick.
It's quite interesting you say that, because I remember listening to you say that on another podcast a while ago, actually, and because I work casually in a couple health food stores while I'm studying, and it was kind of known when I got the job that to give everyone just the methylated version, because that's supposed to be better. Like, so if they come in for a B vitamin.
Did people come back and report adverse reactions?
I haven't had anyone, no, but after listening to you say that, now I've questioned only giving it to people that are specifically told to have it.
Yeah, but you don't, there's no reason why you really specifically need to have it. So you don't need to have methyls just because you've got MTHFR. What I think the two cases are going to be for if you're homozygous C677T and fertility, it's important. And if you've got high homocysteine. So if you've got high homocysteine, you've got to ascertain why, but part of the reason is you might have a deficiency in methylfolate. You'll need some methyl B12 because you can't use methylfolate without methyl B12. And you also need some B6 to lower homocysteine. You might also need some choline because it regenerates homocysteine through into methionine as well. So the supplements that are designed to lower homocysteine will have methyls in them, and because high homocysteine is a cardiovascular risk, taking the methyls to get it down is one of the only, it will get it down quickly. However, if the methyls are causing you to have a panic attack or depression or anxiety or insomnia, then that's not, that you need to figure out why, and which is, it's often due to high histamine, and bring that down, and then you can go in and take the methyls after that. But a lot of people will take methyls. I've seen them come into my clinic and they are an anxious mess. They're overwhelmed, they're teary. They have things going on like emotional stuff or health issues that are making them unhappy, but the methyls are tipping them over to being completely overwhelmed and not being able to cope. So I often pull people off methyls rather than give them, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard you say that before, and I thought that was quite fascinating because not people are complete opposite in the naturopath field, I reckon. But so if people are interested,
people are like, yeah, I'm just so aware of it. Anyone comes to me and they're on methyls and they've got any symptom that I really think could potentially be that, I pull them off them and they'll be like, oh my God, Jo, like I feel like, oh, my headaches have stopped, or I'm not so anxious, oh my God, I'm sleeping better, my skin's not itchy anymore. I don't think people realize that it can exacerbating many symptoms.
I'm really glad that you said that, because I think it's something that people need to hear about, especially if they're just walking into a health food store picking up anything or being told otherwise.
And I was saying, isn't it interesting, we were talking about it before we went live with this episode, that different naturopaths say different recommendations, and how you go on your study and you learn the same degree, but you come out knowing different bits of information and not always the information that you need to be a practitioner.
It's not good for patients. There's a huge disparity in how practitioners practice and their knowledge and exposure. I just think I know that my knowledge came from huge exposure to a huge number of patients when I first started. Like at MTHFR support, I was seeing 8 patients a day, 4 days a week when I first started, or 3 days and then 4 days when I first started. And that's huge for a naturopath when you're first starting out. You never get to see that many patients. So it's the volume of people you see, and then you start to see links. You know, like histamine is a major cause of acne, really. So how do we know this? Because we were getting people off histamine because of methylation issues, and lo and behold, their acne is so much better. It's a major cause of eczema, but it does absolutely cause acne. But it's just about seeing patterns in your patients.
With going back to the MTHFR, if people are really curious, do you even recommend going and getting tested, or do you just automatically go get your histamine checked?
I normally actually don't test it. I don't find it that necessary. I don't do fertility though. It's just not an area of interest of mine. If I was going to do fertility, I would test for MTHFR definitely, and I would test for fasting homocysteine. But I don't do fertility, so no, I don't find it a necessary test to have. Homocysteine, absolutely, mainly because I'm doing a lot of work with histamine, and one of the major drivers of histamine intolerance is mold illness. Now, nothing is going to drive your homocysteine down low like mold, right? Mold contains oxalate, and oxalate shares the same transport carrier as sulfur, right? And what happens is the oxalates hog the sulfur train. They get on there and they block it. And then what happens is you start to dump sulfur in the urine. And that is a disaster, because sulfur is needed to make glutathione and for your sulfation pathway, sulfation detoxification pathway. It also makes mucin in the gut. It's really, really important. And what happens is, to get sulfur, your body will start chopping up homocysteine, because homocysteine is a storage molecule for sulfur, right? It's got 2 roles. It's a storage molecule for sulfur, and it's also involved in methylation, creating SAMe for methylation. So when you've got oxalate, mold issues, oxalate issues, you're dumping your sulfur, and to get sulfur, you will start using your homocysteine. So your homocysteine will lower. So when I see patients with low homocysteine, and they'll have crazy food intolerances, crazy histamine issues, they've done many gut microbiome tests, they might have done SIBO testing, they might have done pretty thorough treatments for that, and they're no better, and it's mostly mold. And I'm working with a practitioner who's wonderful, Melanie, and she works with me, and she's a mold specialist. So I'm really now getting a lot better at picking up mold illness, and I won't let people get past me if I think they've got mold illness, because it will drive serious chronic health issues, and it's so often overmissed. So it's, yeah, so that's a long-winded answer to that question about homocysteine. High, you've got issues with methylation, right? Why? Because you might have MTHFR homozygous C677T. You might have issues with B12 because you're not absorbing it, right? And you need to take a homocysteine lowering products. But high homocysteine might not make you feel unwell. You might not have symptoms of it. It will just cause blood clotting. So it could cause a stroke or a heart attack, right? It's not good, but low homocysteine is when people feel very, very unwell. Those people feel very sick.
What about phase 2 liver detox pathways? I noticed that with me, a lot of my symptoms, when I've started to really focus on my phase 2 pathways, I'm so much better with a lot of things. Would that be in relation to everything else? So that if I was to have MTHFR, like my mum got hers tested and she had quite a few, so I haven't even bothered testing it. I just know that it might be there and have all the symptoms that we've talked about before.
So your phase 2, I mean, you really absolutely be looking at methylation for phase 2. So you need to ensure that you've got, phase 2 methylation is going to detoxify certain pharmaceuticals and toxins, but estrogen is one of the big things that detoxifies. So the thing with that is you're looking at the COMT gene and COMT enzyme. So COMT detoxifies estrogen by methylation. The thing with COMT is it's completely impacted by the environment. So you can have a gene mutation on COMT. So you could be a male and have a gene mutation on COMT and have no real problems with estrogen. Men have estrogen, right? But you don't have many issues with estrogen. So it's not necessarily going to act like it's overloaded, right? However, if you don't have enough methyl groups, right? So if you're not creating enough methyl groups, or you're using them, right, for other things like breaking down adrenaline and stress, then your COMT enzyme will be impacted, right? So it's not necessarily a gene, it's the environment that's going to impact it. So one of the biggest examples is you can be, have no mutation on COMT, right? And it will act like a mutation, will act slow because of estrogen detoxification issues by the gut. So simply, if you're a woman with estrogen and you're constipated, you are not pooping out your estrogen, and it's going to recycle back through the methylation pathway in the liver, and it's going to put a real burden on COMT. So that enzyme is sluggish and slow because of the environment, not a gene mutation, right? So that's absolutely right. So, but then we've got, so methylation, but guys, what you've got to also remember is what happens with things like estrogen and a lot of toxins is detoxification pathways bind up your toxins and hormones for passage through the bowel. And if your gut's not going to good, things like the beta-glucuronidase enzyme are going to deconjugate them. So it's going to deconjugate toxins, it's going to deconjugate estrogen, and then it's going to go back to the liver. So gut is majorly important, because if your gut's not good, everything's going to cycle back to the liver. And then you've got your sulfation pathway. So that can be out if you've got issues with oxalates and mold. You can get oxalates from yeast overgrowth, candida, but mold is going to drive the biggest issues with that. Then you're going to be deficient in sulfur. So your sulfation pathway won't be working. Plus, if you don't have enough sulfur, your glutathione is going to be compromised. And if you don't have enough glutathione works on all the pathways. Yeah, all those pathways need to be considered and looked at. Yeah, but if you start with the gut, right, you're going to have, if you've got good hydrochloric acid, good microbiome, you're going to absorb your B12, tip. If you've got good gut function and you're eating lots of green leafy vegetables, you should be absorbing your folate, right? If you eat animal protein, you're absorbing it, you get your methionine to make SAMe, right? All that stuff's really, really important. Okay, so gut, right? And then when you're looking at the gut and oxalates and stuff and dumping your sulfur, you've got to fix that to get your sulfur. So the gut, I'm sure that if you heard about start with the gut at college, that's true, right? So if your gut's functioning, you're going to be enabling your liver to work better. Liver is an incredible detoxifying organ. It's just amazing at doing it. What falls down more than anything is the gut, because it's so exposed to the outside world. There's so many things that can go on with the gut, like stress, the pill, antibiotics, medications, getting SIBO, having digestive enzyme insufficiency, eating sugar, processed foods, glyphosate. The amount of things that go wrong with the gut is massive. and the liver just takes the burden of it quite well, right? But it's the gut that is really driving most of the issues.
That's incredible, and there's so much. The gut takes a hammering. What would be your first number one recommendation for someone that comes into your clinic that it looks like their gut is unhealthy? What would be the first thing that you would recommend, or pathway that you would put them on in order to help repair?
So I really, SIBO is really the major cause of SIBO causes 80% of IBS. So many people, practitioners, are just looking at the large bowel, right? You find, however, the small bowel is your big absorption organ, right? So if you have gut issues, right? So bloating, well, it's gas, it's probably SIBO. If you've got reflux and heartburn, it is very likely SIBO driving up histamine, because histamine stimulates hydrochloric acid, right? If you've got low iron, SIBO. If you've got low B12, could be SIBO. If you've got low folate, could be SIBO. So any histamine symptoms, SIBO. Chronic constipation, loose stools, SIBO bacteria deconjugates bile acid, so you can have issues with fat malabsorption. So clinically, I see SIBO as being like the biggest issue with the gut, and definitely the biggest driver of histamine intolerance when it comes to gut issues. So, histamine really is driven from SIBO, big time, yeast, candida, oxalates, mold, and estrogen, big time. They're the three things that are going to drive histamine in most people, right? So the SIBO stimulates histamine because the bacteria create inflammation and will stimulate histamine. So you're going to get histamine symptoms. You're going to get all your skin stuff. Rosacea. I mean, rosacea is a SIBO symptom, but you're going to get eczema, hives, acne, itchy skin. You're going to have gut issues, which can be diarrhea or nausea, is definitely histamine often. You've got, plays havoc with estrogen, right? So hormonal migraines and headaches. Hormonal insomnia is often driven from histamine. You've got all the neurological stuff. So you've got headaches, migraines, vertigo. You've got problems regulating your body temperature. You've got anxiety, insomnia. So those symptoms mostly, unless you've got mold illness, are coming from the gut, and it's mainly coming from SIBO because the DAO enzyme that breaks down histamine is very concentrated in the small bowel. So if you have inflammation in the small bowel driven from SIBO, it's going to reduce your DAO enzyme synthesis and excretion, right? So you've got more histamine being made and less histamine being broken down, right? So when we're looking at gut issues, SIBO is extremely common, and I get 99% of my patients to test for SIBO, and it's mostly positive.
For those that are outside of the medical field and have just heard SIBO for the first time, could you just explain simply what it is and then how we get tested for it?
Yeah, so SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So basically what happens is the gut contains literally trillions of bacteria, okay? And you can get an overgrowth of specific types of bacteria in the small bowel that shouldn't be there at all, or an overgrowth of bacteria that's meant to be there, but it's in numbers that are too high. And then what happens is when you eat, this is tricky for people, when you eat healthy foods that are classified as FODMAPs and resistant starch, right? So garlic and onion are FODMAP, for instance. Rice is starch, right? Legumes are starch. Legumes are FODMAPs. What happens is the overgrowth of bacteria take those foods and convert them into gas. The gas will cause a lot of belching and flatulence and bloating, but the gas is going to cause inflammation, right? And that will cause, more, it can cause any sort of gut issue you like, but it causes a release of histamine. And that has massive systemic problems. So the testing for SIBO is actually a breath test because we're looking for the gases that are being released. Okay, so there's certain bacteria that release methane gas, and there's certain bacteria that release hydrogen gas, and there's certain bacteria that release hydrogen sulfide gas. So I know in Australia, we're only pretty sure we're only looking at methane and hydrogen gas. I saw some labs in the UK yesterday actually that are looking at hydrogen sulfide, which I'm not sure if we've got here. And you can also get SIBO, which is small intestinal fungal overgrowth. So that's yeast overgrowth. That can drive a lot of oxalate issues, but you can't test for that. That's more about clinical symptoms. But it is the major cause of IBS globally. I mean, IBS is such a broad term, but if people have chronic gut issues and food intolerances, histamine issues, SIBO is absolutely something you need to look at.
That's really fascinating. I think I need to get tested. How would you go about treating someone with SIBO? I've looked into it and it's quite an intensive journey.
Yeah, well, it's not fun for the patient, I'll be honest. It's one of the key things with SIBO is you have to understand what's driving it. So you've got to treat it and you've got to treat the cause at the same time. So is the cause chronic stress? Is the cause low digestive enzyme function? Is the cause constantly taking antibiotics for something else like a UTI or acne, blah, blah, blah. Now, you need to remove the food source of the bacteria, which is you need to get FODMAPs out of your diet and you need to get resistant starch out of your diet. So the diet part of it is really important. It's a bit hard, but like a lot of people feel so much better when they do it that they're compliant. So you need to remove the food source of the bacteria. You need to go in with specific herbs that are specific for the different bacteria. So hydrogen responds very well to berberine. Okay. Now methane is actually made from hydrogen, right? You need 4 hydrogen atoms to make methane, I think. So that will respond well to berberine as well. Methane is also, the specific herb is allicin, which is an active constituent of garlic. It's not a FODMAP, like garlic is FODMAP, but this one constituent is not FODMAP. That's quite specific for methane, SIBO. Oregano will help with methane, SIBO, and oregano also helps with hydrogen SIBO, and oregano also helps with yeast. And oregano also helps with hydrogen sulfide, right? So oregano is actually a really amazing herb for any kind of SIBO issues, right? So you've got to get the herbal medicine in place. You need to correct digestive enzyme insufficiency, because if you've got low hydrochloric acid, it's going to keep, the hydrochloric acid is actually antimicrobial. So you're going to keep getting microbes in your gut. Okay. You need to make sure you've got good pancreatic juice, because pancreatic juice alkalizes the small bowel. If it's acidic, that's a growing, that's how SIBO bacteria can grow in an acidic environment, right? That's important. You've got to get the bowels moving. This is super, super important. This is, your bowels aren't moving well if you're not having really good formed stools, and not, you need complete emptying. They need to be great, like really great stools. That's important. It's really telling us that the undigested food and bad bacteria is being swept out. Okay, that's really, really important. The other really key thing with treatment is looking at biofilm. So biofilm is this protective coating that bacteria create. Yeast and candida do it as well. It's like this matrix. I think of it like Glad wrap, and the bacteria hide underneath that matrix. So during treatment, not straight away, but sort of, a few weeks into treatment, you need to start breaking open the biofilm with specific enzymes and supplements that break it, so that you can get to the bacteria that's underneath. And that's really important, because this is how it becomes chronic, because your immune system can't get at the bacteria under the biofilm. Antibiotics can't, and herbs definitely can't. So you need to work on breaking it open. Right? SIBO is, well, my colleague Nicole and I are getting much better at it the more patients we see, and we do learn, from people, but it's like, it's not easy, but there's a really few key things that need to be perfected before you can really, like, for instance, if my patient's bowels aren't still good, I'm like, we're not retesting yet, because it won't be gone yet. So it's about knowing that. It's about getting fixated on bowels and making sure that they're perfect. And then after, after about 6 weeks, you should retest. You should always retest SIBO, because if you don't, you start adding the foods back in, it's simply going to grow back. And then the patient is back to square one. So testing, retesting again, because it's a pain, SIBO. It's not fun. It's really tedious for the patient. It really is, because the diet is so restrictive, but it really has to be done, the diet. So we have a mix of patients. Some patients they're so unwell that they feel so amazing after about a week on the diet that they're extremely compliant. And then other patients, it's a bit difficult, and sometimes we refer them off to get antibiotics, which is not a fail-safe treatment, because it can often come back, but it can sort of give them some relief for a short sort of 6 months or so. Yeah.
So it's more putting them on like a low FODMAP diet.
Got to be low FODMAP. The thing is, which a lot of people don't realise, is how much starch drives SIBO. So a lot of these SIBO cookbooks have like a lot of starch. Like they'll cook with rice, and I can diagnose SIBO from rice consumption, honestly. Like, it's unbelievable. Rice drives and feeds SIBO bacteria big time. So a lot of the SIBO cookbooks or protocols aren't considering how much starch drives SIBO as well. So it's not just FODMAPs, it's starch as well. So you got to get the rice out, the potato and stuff. So it's a bit boring, but it, people feel great. People feel amazing when they do it.
And obviously you're talking about making sure the stools are well formed and bowels are moving. So you're just looking at your hydration and your high fiber for these people.
Often, it's often not fiber. Fiber often makes SIBO worse, because, your high fiber foods are FODMAPs. So it just depends on what driving, if a textbook methane case of SIBO is constipation, because methane slows the motility. So if it's methane SIBO, what can often happen if you've got chronic constipation from methane SIBO, you get the diet right, you start killing off the methane bacteria, and the bowels will move. Okay. I do what I do if it's not working like that. There's some specific like herbal medicines that work on on bile acids and liver function and stuff, and some natural laxatives that can actually get things working. And it's good to get your digestive enzyme function working, because it's my bile acids, for instance, are a natural laxative. Can I name products? So like the one I'm using at the moment is MediHerb Cascara Complex. I find that really great. It just stimulates your own digestive enzymes, and people will find it really efficacious for getting the bowels moving. People can rely on taking high-dose magnesium, but that acts as like a osmotic reaction, driving water into the bowel to get you moving, but it's not working from the upper part of the digestion, which I find you need that. You need to be working on the digestive enzyme part and the upper gut, so it starts sweeping out of the small bowel, not just working on the large bowel. Does that make sense? So I've had a patient, she was so compliant. She just couldn't poop, but she'd take like 1,200 milligrams of magnesium a day to get her bowels moving, but her SIBO did not go away. She's so compliant with diet. The SIBO did not go until we added in the herbs for digestion, and then it moved. So just relying on high-dose magnesium to get your bowels moving as an osmotic reaction is not actually that helpful. This is just all from clinical experience, girls. It's just, you see it. Your patients teach you stuff.
I love that. That's so interesting, because I've experimented myself with some magnesium, and it doesn't do much for myself. So very interesting. Also wanted to ask, while we're talking about SIBO, is that some people obviously don't recommend taking any sort of probiotics when you've got SIBO symptoms. And then there's some practitioners out there that do recommend some probiotics at certain stages of treatment. What's your thoughts? If you've got any symptoms that we've talked about that look like it may be SIBO, do you stop the probiotics you're on, or do you steer clear of them? What do you think?
I don't prescribe a lot of probiotics at all. So probiotics can definitely make SIBO worse. They're not, you don't need them for SIBO. Okay, then you got to think, okay, so what is happening to the large bowel where these probiotics are meant to go and help? What's happening to the large bowel and the bacteria in the large bowel if you have SIBO? And what's happening is that the SIBO bacteria taking FODMAP foods and resistant starch, converting them to gas. Those foods are the foods that the gut bacteria in the large bowel love to eat, to proliferate and grow. They're prebiotic. And then they'll create short-chain fatty acids, which is, you know, extremely important for the immune system of the whole gut. So it's like, if you're just taking probiotics, number one, they can break open the small bowel and populate the small bowel with bacteria that shouldn't be there. And then secondly, probiotics don't actually provide the large bowel with permanent bacteria. And why do you need a probiotic anyway? It's because you most likely are not getting the foods that you need to feed the gut microbiome down to the large bowel because you've got SIBO. I mean, yes, some people have annihilated their microbiome with the oral contraceptive pill and antibiotics, but you need to think about it on a case-by-case basis. I hardly ever prescribe probiotics. I just think they're expensive waste of time. Like, I mean, yes, if someone's got acute or sort of recurrent urinary tract infections, but why? Like, major cause of that is oxalates and histamine and estrogen issues, so, or the pill. But if someone needs, there are some probiotics that can help with some conditions for a short period of time, but they don't necessarily help. You know, if someone says to me, oh, this probiotic is helping XYZ, it's like, why? And you got to get to the reason why, because the reason why is driving like other things like hormone imbalance and B12 deficiency and fatigue and insomnia. So I don't use them that much, and they're really, I honestly hardly ever use them.
Beck and I are just sitting here nodding away. You can't see us, but we're sitting here going, "Yep, that's right. It's what's driving the underlying issue." We could probably spend another hour or three talking about this specifically, and we're really conscious of your time. Just wondering, I'm really curious if we don't mind going back a few steps to mold illness, because I feel that it is an extremely important topic that is only just starting to be talked about. I might only have just picked it up, you know, in the last
I don't think
year,
it's talked about enough in this field at all. I think it's very, it's not a huge topic, and it should be.
And I was just wondering, what would your typical mold illness case look like coming to your clinic, and what symptoms would they have, and how would you look at assessing if that's an issue?
Okay. Well, I don't assess them because I don't specialize in mold illness, because it's extremely specialized. What I am good at is identifying patients that are highly likely to have mold illness, and then I get Melanie to see them. So she works on all the environmental stuff about what you need to do about your house and stuff. Like, I'm the most undomesticated person. Like I can't even get someone to change the lock on my window. Like, I'm not good at that stuff, but I can pick it up, right? So these patients, they will come to me with, they will often have multiple food intolerances, all the food, FODMAP, starch, histamine, sulfur, oxalate, all of it, multiple food intolerances. They'll often have a lot of tingling, numbness, unusual skin sensations. They'll definitely have digestive issues. They'll have fatigue, they'll have brain fog, they'll have headaches, migraines, they'll have frequent infections. They look sick, girls, they look sick. They might have fibromyalgia, joint pain, frequent urination, recurrent urinary tract infections, cystitis, interstitial cystitis, right? But it's like, okay, well, that can be caused from other things, but they often are like, I've done SIBO testing, I've done Candida, I've done that protocol, I've done that protocol, nothing works, nothing works, nothing works, right? And they've had these issues for 20 years. Like, these are red flags. These is like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. This is mold, this is mold, this is mold, right? Or people will send me a whole lot of functional medicine tests, SIBO testing, all your microbiome testing, genetic reports, then they'll do an organic acids test. And I will, you know, it's sort of a bit overwhelming. You get all these tests and 1,000 blood tests and, like, you know, 50 pages of case notes. I'm looking at what I look for is oxalates. that's all. I'm like, if you got oxalates and you've got high mold markers simply on an organic acids test, it's not the only marker for mold, but you can look for mold species or yeast species and high oxalate. If that's just what they give me, I'm like, that is your problem. Oxalates are sharp crystals, they're like knives. So if you went to emergency with 2 broken arms, 2 broken legs, and a knife in your gut sticking out, you'd be like, can you get the knife? Everyone would be like, get the knife out, right? They're knives in your body. So they're causing absolute havoc with inflammation and driving it down your sulfur. This is the catch. You're so inflamed, but you can't make your glutathione because you don't have any sulfur left. It's very causative. And if they've got low homocysteine as well, that's like a massive red flag. Okay, so some other things to look for with mold illness with testing. So they have often have low cortisol, they'll have low DHEA, they'll have low homocysteine, so they'll have low glutathione. It's interesting, in the organic acids test, you'll actually come up with low vitamin C, and that's because the vitamin C is going in to make oxalate. Okay, you might see a stool test with high yeast, high fungus in the stool test as well, right? But that is coming from, you know, candida overgrowth in the gut. But so oxalates can be driven from candida or yeast sort of overgrowth, but when they're quite severe, it's mold, because mold is a yeast. The other thing we need to remember about mold, and this is when the penny dropped for me, it's penicillin, isn't it? Right? So it's penicillin. So you have penicillin, it's like you're taking antibiotics every day for 20 years and no one knows. But, you know, and it's just the people like, oh yeah, there was a bit of mold in my last apartment. And it's like, well, actually, when you strip back the paint, there's mold everywhere. Some people are genetically can't process mold, so it acts like a toxin, a poison. Yeah, so Melanie, Melanie was a patient of mine, and she finished at Endeavour about 18 months ago, and she has mold illness and oxalate issues herself. Well, she's better now because she's fixed herself. But I got her to work with me to deal with these patients that I see. They're kind of, those are the heartbreaking ones. I've got on my website, I've got the latest 3 reviews are from 3 people that Melanie and I have helped, they were on death's door. I'm not joking. These people are very sick. Now, one of them was down to, I don't know, 42 kilos. So yeah, it's, however, sometimes I have patients that it's like, you just don't make sense. You know,
yeah.
like it's like you're not responding to, like if you've got histamine driven from SIBO, like you get on that diet and within a week you feel 80% better.
Mm-hmm.
People don't.
Yeah.
Right? They do the thing, they're compliant, and then they're not better. And it's like, oh yeah, Joe, like I feel, you know, people will come back to me and go, like headaches are gone, fatigue's gone, anxiety's gone, gut issues are gone. But the moldies are like, oh, like, no, I'm still getting headaches. Like, I'm not sure why. I'm still tired. My gut's still not good. It's stuff like that, where it's like there's something else going on. And I've referred many patients to Melanie, and all of them have come back positive for mold. All of them. So you can get mold, you can get the mycotoxins build up in your body. So you might get out of the mold, but the mold's still in your body. Also, it gets on your possessions, you know, so you might move house, but it's in your bedding, it's in your clothes, you know, it can get into your furnishings and you move with it. If you're allergic to it, then it's a big problem.
That's so interesting, because I was about to ask a question, but you just answered it. If you do have an issue with mold or allergic to mold or anything like that, are you just focusing on the liver then, just trying to detoxify it from you, or what do you?
No, this is the thing, right? I don't know what Mel does.
Right. Okay.
We need to get her on.
We need to talk to her. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, she's doing that. I'm sticking with what I do. I love gut stuff. I love hormones.
Yeah.
I still love my herb. I mean, I know I do all this tricky stuff, but I still love my herbal medicine and stuff like that. Like I love that kind of stuff. So Mel's no, it's Mould. It's, you know, look, it's a combination of dealing with your environment and how, and you know, some people they're like, oh my God, I'm moving tomorrow. Then other people have a huge 5-bedroom house and 3 kids, and they just can't move right now. And so it's about, okay, well, what you need to move out of your bedroom and put your bed somewhere else in any other room that's away from the mold for now. You need to get it remediated. You need to try and look at what you can do. There's binders you can use to get it out of your body. Definitely looking at liver detoxification pathways. There's all sorts, you know, and you got to pull the oxalate. We get the oxalates out, and that's hard because the oxalates dump. So oxalates deposit in tissue, joints, and the gut and stuff. And when you start reducing your oxalate into low, so when you start reducing oxalate, your body starts to dump them, and they start moving out of tissue, and that's very, very tricky to deal with. So it's tricky. It's very, very specialized area, you know. But I mean, I sort of, yeah, that's why I got Mel on board, because she's been through it herself, and she's done extra training on it, and she's into it. Whereas I'm good at diagnosing it, but I don't treat it.
I think that's great, because it would also be good. I'm learning a lot, but people that listen to this, it might have a thought, go, oh, actually, could that be me? Yeah. Maybe I need to go and see someone. So that's really useful.
Yeah, and I've loved everything that we've discussed today, and I'm just looking at the time and conscious of that, but we're going to put everything that we discussed today in the show notes, and everyone go check out your website. And obviously you offer online consults as well as in your clinic in Sydney. Yeah. And you have an amazing ebook as well. So if everyone's been listening to this, loving and wanting to dive deeper into the methylation issues and histamine intolerance and everything, definitely check out Jo's ebook. But is there anything you wanted to say before we finish up today? Is there anything we haven't covered that you would love to share?
I just think for people listening who have got chronic health issues, you know, when you go to a practitioner, you need to be really looking at gut microbiome issues at least. So if your practitioner is not sending you off for SIBO testing, you know, stool testing, and looking and organic acids testing, right? You know, you're sort of guessing. And when you've got chronic health issues, you don't want guesswork. The testing is really, really important to ascertain what's driving. You know, I think people need to understand the gut issues are going to drive neurological issues. They're going to drive depression, anxiety, insomnia, vertigo. They're going to drive headaches and migraines. They're going to drive skin issues, eczema, hives, itchy skin, dermatitis, rosacea, acne. It's going to drive chronic pain. It's going to drive vulvodynia and fibromyalgia and just joint pain, muscle pain. It's going to drive fatigue. It's going to drive hormone imbalance and PMS and PMDD. It's going to drive issues with methylation. It's going to drive issues with sulfation and all of it. Right? It's very, you know, all this stuff I do, I'm a gut specialist, right? Because that's where it's coming from. And then we take the burden off the gut and we make sure that that's great. I think people need to understand gut issues can drive issues with your biochemistry, like your liver detoxification issues, right? That's a big problem. So when people are, you know, these chronically ill people with multiple chemical sensitivity and multiple food intolerances, the gut is disrupting your methylation and your sulfation and your glutathionation pathways. So the gut is driving a lot of it. And so you need to look, and when we consider mold, well, it's penicillin, right? So it's driving massive gut issues as well. So if you're going to a practitioner and they're like, oh, like, let's do a methylation panel, like, it's just a waste of time and money. It's like, why do you have methylation issues? Why do you have sulfation issues? Why do you have all this stuff? And so if you do at least start with gut, and absolutely SIBO is such a big driver of IBS, gut stuff, which drives systemic issues. So you've got to be looking at that. And if that hasn't been done, you're doing yourself a disservice, because that needs to be done really, really thoroughly. So that's my 2 cents worth.
No, I love it. Thank you so much. And you articulate everything so well.
And that's just a great way to finish this episode and this conversation. So thank you so much, Jo. We really appreciate having you on.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. It will really help support this channel and share this message. By all means, go over to our social media platforms and let us know what you'd like to hear more of. All of our links will be in the show notes and things we've discussed today in the episode. We'll talk to you next week.